Okay, so there's a lot of discussion of the Eastern Front in unconditional surrender, and that's entirely understandable. It is the most complex of the theatres in the game. It draws the largest commitment. So at some point I should do a video about the Russian front. This is not that video. And in part that's because there's a whole bunch of videos I think I need to do first. I've kind of covered some basic tactical stuff, but I need to give you a sense of the shape of the game before you can understand how something like the Eastern Front fits into the general shape of that game. So the next video I do is going to be about the end game, and then I'm going to follow it up with the openings. But for today I want to tell you not to do this. Take a look at the map, which is from an actual game I played, and try to see what the error is. Specifically, it's a Russian error. I'll give you a few moments. I'm sure everybody got this. There are multiple Axis units that can reach Moscow, and Moscow does not have a garrison. So in this specific game, I didn't succeed in breaking through and taking Moscow, but it is possible to do so, and I think it'll be interesting to kind of look at the sequencing that you would need to think about in this situation. Sequencing of attacks is one of the central tactical skills in unconditional surrender, and it's still the area I think where I make the most mistakes and I see the most mistakes made by my opponents. So in this case there are 3 different routes. Let's take a look at those. If we want to go the northern route from Smolensk, there are 2 units that need to be removed. The first one is not a problem, but the unit at Ryazan is a problem. In fact, we're going to see the units at Ryazan and Tula are problems in general because they effectively constitute a second line of defence behind the first one. The big issue with Ryazan being that you can't really surround it, so you're not going to destroy the unit. The best you can do is dislodge it, and when you dislodge it, you want to dislodge it north rather than east. In the south, there are 3 units in the way, including the unit at Tula, and they have to be removed, and they have to be removed without using the Panzer at Kursk, because it's the Panzer at Kursk that needs to make the exploitation. Tula is particularly difficult because, again, you're not going to be able to surround it, so the best you're going to be able to do is dislodge it to the east, and you need to dislodge it twice in order to clear a path for the Panzer. More promising is the exploitation by the Polish units around Bryansk. Now we do still need to remove 3 enemy units here, and one of those does need to be the unit at Ryazan. But the advantage here is the Polish units themselves are unlikely to be the main attackers that we're using. Allied units generally aren't doing most of the heavy lifting on the Eastern Front. That's being done by the German units. We want to surround and destroy Bryansk anyway, independently of getting to Moscow. If you already want to achieve a particular objective and that's a stepping stone on the way to achieving something else, then that's a good route to look at. But before we do, let's look for chinks in the armour. Whenever you're attacking a front, this is always the first thing you should do. Ask yourself, where are the chinks in this defensive line? Where are the points that are vulnerable? In this particular defensive line, that's north of Smolensk, because the unit there can be surrounded. And once a unit is surrounded, any DR result you get converts into a step loss. Remember, the objective is to win first and exploit second. We need a breakthrough before we can use it. The 11th Infantry isn't going to achieve very much. It's tracking across a river into rough terrain. It will only get 1 attack in because that attack costs 4 movement points. Don't expect very much from it. However, the attack from the west will be 2 consecutive attacks. They will only be facing rough terrain. You can see from the chart, these are pretty good odds, about 1 in 3 of destroying that unit. If we succeed in doing so, then the 17th Infantry can swing round and cut off the retreat of another Russian unit. The line begins to unravel. But in this situation, my first thought would go to Orel. What's the big deal at Orel? Well, there's an operational Russian fighter there. It can offer ground support to the Bryansk units. The Bryansk units are paired and therefore can't be isolated, so they're not going to be easy to root out, even once they're surrounded. Add in some air support and they could hold the Germans up for quite a while. This is not an unusual problem on the Eastern Front in 1941 or in the first summer offensive for the Germans. The German army often runs out of Luftwaffe support relatively early because it brings a lot more troops than it did historically, and the trade-off with that is you just don't have the production points to maintain Luftwaffe sorties. If we attack Orel, that serves a dual purpose. It captures the town of Orel, which ultimately we have to do at some point. It also deprives the Soviets of the air support that's based there, and therefore makes it easier to complete the surrounding and capture of Bryansk. But you want to do this with care. The Yugoslav unit to the south can be used to control the retreat of the unit at Orel. Now remember, we can't surround the unit at Orel. There's no way to get to it. So we are only looking for a retreat here. But we want to control where that goes to. If we can force it to move northeast, then it's moving into open terrain, where it's vulnerable. In open terrain, you've always got a much greater chance of just getting a DD result. You can launch more attacks because each of your attacks only costs 2 movement points. It's generally good. The other thing is, we want to launch the attack with the 2nd Panzer, not with the Panzer at Kursk. That's because the 2nd Panzer is further away. If it succeeds, the Panzer at Kursk is closer to the front line and therefore better able to exploit the breakthrough. That's a good general rule of thumb. The units that are further back should launch the attacks that create holes so that the units that are further forward can do the exploitation. Now we could get lucky here. We might just get a 1 in 18 chance and get a defender disrupted. The Panzer would move into Orel. It would then get a subsequent attack afterwards on the unit that had retreated. We might finish this by destroying the unit at Orel. We have a good chance of getting at least a retreat, removing the unit, and with it its air support. But there's also a chance that we might just fail. We might get an attacker stopped. We might just not shift the unit. About 50% of the time. Generally speaking, you do not need to plan for wild chances, 1 in 36, 1 in 100 chances of failure. There is a degree of bad luck against which no strategy will be effective. So you just don't bother planning for that. If that's the way the dice fall for you, you're going to lose. But you do want to plan for situations like this, where about half the time your attack is going to fail. In this case, our contingency is fairly straightforward. In the event that the attack fails, the 18th Infantry can simply attack the Soviet 7th Infantry. Because of the failed attack, that unit can no longer retreat to a position that supports Orel. It's going to take 4 attacks in the open. Now, the Soviets can avoid that turning into a total disaster by committing air support, but remember, part of the objective here is to run out the Soviet air support in order to allow us to conduct attacks elsewhere. The 1st Panzer in the south has a unit it wants to attack in the open, and it would rather like to do that with the unit having no air support available to it. There's a 1 in 12 chance of a Panzer in fair weather attacking a Soviet unit in the open, just destroying it. Literally the unit just blowing up. That happens occasionally, and when it does, it's great. The Panzer at Kursk can, if necessary, conduct its own attack on the 7th Infantry in order to shift it out of the way, and still have enough movement points to swing round and attack Orel once from the east with an isolate bonus. Isolate bonuses make a huge difference. An isolate bonus is like having air power, but it's combined with a situation where the opponent doesn't have a retreat. You're looking here at about a 50% chance of just destroying the unit outright, a better than 5 in 6 chance of scoring a step loss on it. You are almost certainly going to take Orel, no matter how bad your luck is in this situation. So, Orel is eliminated. We now have 2 German units available that can circle round and cut off all the retreats from Bryansk. They can also commit to making an assault when they do so. That's always a useful thing to do. If a unit has enough movement points to conduct one mobile attack, then rather than conduct a mobile attack, simply fix the unit on an assault when it gets to the final position. That then allows you to conduct the attack at some later point where the sequencing might be better for you. Once those 2 units are in position, the German infantry to the west of Bryansk can move in and launch 2 attacks on the city. It's pretty good odds that Bryansk and the unit to the northwest of it will fall. Once one of them goes, the other one will almost certainly go because of the isolate bonus. And there's a very good chance that that will happen with the Polish units still being available for exploitation. Likely the situation will look something like this. The German units will pretty much all have activated. They will have destroyed the Soviet unit north of Smolensk. They will have taken Orel. They will have destroyed the 2 Soviet units at Bryansk. Polish units can now move through to Moscow if they can just dislodge that unit at Ryazan. The best chance a Polish unit has of doing that is about 1 in 6. You'll need a bit of luck to get away with this. I didn't have this degree of luck, but I did take Orel and Bryansk and destroy the Soviet units that were defending in the open, so it was a pretty good turn all round, about 10 points of national will swinging in my favour. In any case, as the Soviet player, you do not want to leave the survival of Moscow to a 1 in 6 dice roll. If there are Axis units that can in principle reach a Russian fort, the Russian fort should have a garrison in it. Here's another example from a different game. Notice here that it's Polish and Italian allies rather than Polish and Yugoslav, and here the odds are pretty overwhelming. The units at Bryansk have been surrounded and destroyed. Again, that almost always happens. Now, the only thing standing between the Polish units and the Moscow fort is the 11th Infantry. The reason here that it's so much easier is that there's only a fighter in Ryazan, and fighters neither defend nor exert zones of control. And that's a really easy thing to miss. I've actually seen Moscow fall because a player had a fighter on it, but forgot that there was no infantry underneath the fighter, and a unit just walked in. That's what's about to happen here. The 11th Infantry is going to have to sustain 5 attacks while surrounded. It's not going to survive that. Once it falls, the Polish unit is just going to walk into the fort and remove the fort counter. So it doesn't even matter that the Polish unit will be out on a limb, and there's every possibility that the Soviets will retake the Moscow fort afterwards. Here's an example with Sevastapol. The Russian unit is having to retreat. The moment it retreats, the 17th Infantry can just walk into Sevastopol. This particular case, this was actually a USSR 41 game instead of a main event, and you probably don't want to do this in a USSR 41 game because there just aren't enough German units. When you move into Sevastapol, the unit's going to fall out of supply, and there's going to be a hole in the German line. Both of which are bad. In a main event game, I would absolutely sacrifice the German unit, and I'd even risk a hole forming in the line to remove the fort counter at Sevastopol. It would make a big difference in the next summer offensive. This one isn't a fort, but it came up just as I was completing this video, and I thought it was worth including. It's June 1941. The Axis have been held up in France, but they have managed to conquer all of Africa. They are about to launch their invasion of the Soviet Union, but Turkey is an active Axis power, and the Soviet player has not put any defences on the Turkish border. It's actually too late to do so now. The best that the Soviet player could possibly do is to make 2 strategic moves to get units down there. That will only be 2 infantry units. It's not going to stop that panzer supported by the Turkish troops that are going to be put up into that area. This is another good example of where it's really easy to just miss something and let things slip through. I've seen this happen with the Finnish troops in the north as well, especially with beginners who don't always realise that there are 3 routes the Finnish troops can come through, and they'll maybe cover 2 of them but miss one of them. And it's worth knowing this one. This is just a bit of rote learning. A lot of what you pick up in these types of games is ultimately rote learning. It's just knowing that certain things in certain situations are true. If Tallinn is German occupied, then it takes exactly 8 movement points to go from Leningrad to Tallinn and take it. And it's really easy for an Axis player to just forget that the unit in Leningrad can leave the fort. And more importantly, that when you build a unit in a city, it is built into the fort. You can put the unit into Leningrad so that the fort is never attackable. You do have to remember to do that, and I have lost Leningrad in a game for exactly this. I've gone to capture Talinn. It's always worth, if the Germans leave a hole in their line and you can go through and capture a town, it is always worth sacrificing the 1 point of national will for the unit for the German units that will have to move backwards instead of forwards to go and recapture the location. But I've done this, and then I've forgotten to build the unit in Leningrad at the end of the turn, and a German unit has just walked in and taken it. So, here endeth the lesson. Don't do this. That's the lesson. If a German unit can reach a Russian fort, there should be a garrison in it. At some point, I will go into more detail about the Eastern Front. As I said, in order to understand the Eastern Front, you need to understand the general shape of the game. You also need to understand tactical play. So before I can really talk about the Eastern Front, I need to talk about the end game and the opening. And I'm still working on videos on those. But none of this should hide a basic truth that you need to recognise. I've seen a dozen Russian forts fall simply because they weren't defended. And ultimately, success on any front in the game, and success in the game overall, depends first and foremost on not making these kinds of errors. Good luck with your games, and I will see you next time.